Welcome to our third in a series for young professionals. This is called Overeducated, Underemployed, Is College Worth the Cost? And we have a fantastic panel here that I want to introduce right now who's going to engage in this discussion. And hopefully at some point there'll be some interaction from you all who will participate in this great discussion. First, I want to welcome Dr. Gail Mellow. And Dr. Mellow is the president of LaGuardia Community College in Long Island, Queens. And Long Island City, Queens. Long Island City, Queens, one of the most ethnically diverse campuses in the United States, and a school where a majority of students have family incomes of less than $25,000 a year. Under her leadership, over $20 million in external funding through grants and contracts is secured each year for workforce development programs and initiatives that support at-risk students. In January, Gail received the 2016 NASPA President's Award, giving special recognition to college or university president who has advanced the quality of student life on campus by supporting student affairs, staff, and programs. Congratulations to Gail. Thank you. Our next speaker would be Zakiya Smith, is a strategy director at Lumina Foundation, where she leads work of the foundation to develop new models of student financial support for higher education. Most recently, Zakiya served as a senior advisor for education at the White House Domestic Policy Council, where she focused on developing the president's higher education policy. And I am really pleased to say that Zakiya and I were colleagues back in the day, and it was just such a pleasure working with Zakiya way back in the day. Zakiya also served in the Obama administration as a senior advisor at the Department of Education, where she developed programs and policy and budget solutions to respond to pressing challenges in college access, affordability, and completion. Thank you so much, Zakiya, for coming. And the next is Bob Shireman, who is a senior fellow at the Century Foundation, working on education policy with a focus on for-profit college accountability, quality assurance, and consumer protections. Bob served in the Clinton White House as a senior policy advisor to the National Economic Council, and later in the Obama administration as deputy undersecretary in the Department of Education. Currently, in addition to being part of TCF's education team, Bob serves on the board of Aspire, a national nonprofit that helps low-income students find quality, affordable options. Bob, in his career in education and the administration and working on Capitol Hill, has many policy achievements. I'll mention one or two. One is moving the Department of Education to the direct loan program, which in the end saved $40 billion, which we then poured into increasing Pell Grants for millions of students. That was Bob Shireman who dreamed this up back in the 90s and made it happen with the help of a few senators and a few congressmen. And also was responsible for the passage of helping pass the gainful employment regulations, which helps for-profit colleges be held accountable for delivering results for their students. This is a great panel, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you all.
I think you can hand that off to, here we go. Thank you. Thank you, Mark, and thank you all for coming. We wanted to, before we get into the substance on our end, we wanted to get a sense of the audience. So if I can have a show of hands on a few questions. How many people here have attended at least a semester or full term at a community college? Okay, a few people. How many people are at or have graduated from a public four-year university? All right, how many people are at a private nonprofit four-year university? Okay. And how many people are at or graduated from a for-profit college? We've got one. Okay, so that gives us a sense of things. Thank you. That'll help us as we talk through some of these issues. I wanted to start with way back when I graduated from high school, college was still optional. You could, as a high school graduate, get a job and make a decent living, and it feels like things have changed since then, where college has gone from something that was optional to something that is required for economic security. And I wanted to start by asking Gail and Zakiya to talk some about that shift and maybe about how it has changed how we all think about college and maybe its implications for the national conversations that we're having about college costs these days, and in part whether it's a problem too, that people are going to college to get economic security rather than necessarily going to college because they enjoy academics and the things that happen at an academic institution. So why don't I throw it over to Gail first?
So when we first started, hi everybody, first of all, thank you. It's nice to be here. It's really fun to like individually raise the average age in a room of about 60 people by at least 10 years. So I'm glad you're all your age and I get to do that for you. When we started out, we had a phone call talking about what we would do, and Bob started out saying, well, you know, is it just, you know, just too bad? It's like a commercialization of higher education that we have to think so much about employment. And I said, I wish at LaGuardia Community College or any community college in the country that we would have the luxury of even asking that question. So I want to start out answering that question by really framing a little bit who's going to college where, because even our national statistics dramatically undercount where undergraduates are going. There's something called IPEDS, which is Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System, is that it? And so I have to, every year, that's what I have to give to the feds. It counts just about 33% of the students who go to LaGuardia. So it undercounts what I'm doing. And yet almost everything gets run off of that. So you have a real problem when the federal government, who's giving a lot of money, undercounts the place where most poor students, most low-income students, most immigrants, and most people of color go to college. So one of the things I would say is that we have to really understand who's really in college before we say, is college worth it, and is it worth the cost? One of the pieces that I think it's important to know is that more than half of all undergraduates today are going to a community college. And so we had, I think, 3 or 4, right? I'm one of them. I should have raised my hand, right? And I went to the community college in my hometown because my father went bankrupt the first semester. I was the first person in my family to go to college. My father went bankrupt, and I had to come home and work, you know, 45 hours a week to help the family. So I went nights and weekends to my local community college. And I always say without it, I would have been a checker in Walmart. I would be the best darn checkout person in Walmart, but I wouldn't be a college president. I'd be the checker, right? So when you think about the integration of work and life, I think you have to understand where people are in their lives and why you would choose to go to a community college. Often it's because of your life circumstances. You need to stay in place, you have kids, you're older, you're working, you have family responsibilities, or you had a really poor high school academic preparation. So when you look at who's in a community college, it's like the world is in a community college. They're the most interesting people, I think. They're certainly the people who really want to do something. And I think the challenge is not how much community college costs, because almost nobody goes bankrupt going to a community college. The average cost for the year at LaGuardia Community College is $6,000 a year. That's including fees, that's including books, that's including everything. The challenge is, how do you live on top of that? So when you're poor already and you're working and you're going to college, that can be the challenge. So I think going to a community college is always worth it, but it's most worth it if you graduate. And the challenge for community colleges is not everybody graduates.
So on average, you should go to college. It's pretty clear from the data on average, but people don't live on average. People live their individual lives, and it matters where you go. It matters what options you have available to you. It matters what your background is and what your interests are. I don't necessarily think that I agree that college has always been about just pure academic exploration. So I was at this conference for the liberal arts, which is kind of the most opposite of community college experience that you could imagine, yesterday. And we were reminded that when a lot of liberal arts college presidents like to talk about how what we do is not vocational. We are not preparing people to go to work. We're just preparing you to think. And it's an exploration, and it's a time in your life. And that's all great. But the original colleges in America were designed as vocational colleges. Harvard was designed to train people to be pastors, and that was a very vocational sense. So we've evolved in the United States in how we do college, and it's become increasingly likely that employers will pay you more if you have a college degree, even for things that they didn't used to require a college degree for. And that's, in some ways, it's become the new high school diploma. The reason that the college premium, so there is a wage premium if you have a college degree for the most part, again, on average. So it's worth it in that economic sense. But there are, the wage premium is more so because the high school degree is worth less. So it's kind of a conundrum, should you go? Yes, because I want everybody to have that opportunity, and as long as you're going to a quality program and you graduate, because if you don't graduate and you take on debt, now you just have not the benefit of the wage premium, but the student loans, and no way to really, not to say no way to pay that off, but less of a likelihood of paying it off. So yes, but.
And the wage premium is that extra amount that you earn, supposedly, on average, with a college degree as opposed to just a high school diploma or less than a high school diploma. Let's talk about the costs question and the related issue of student loans. So about a third of people who graduate from college these days have no debt at all, no student loan debt. For the other 2/3, the average debt is about $30,000. And obviously there's a range of people who have small debts and people have some very high debts that often are the ones that get talked about in the newspapers. Talk some about, are some people, a lot of people, paying more than it's worth it to go to college? How should we be thinking about that? You want to start?
Yeah, so I think about this lately. So the headlines, most people are not paying $100,000 to go to college. That is, unfortunately, more people are. And I think about it kind of like Zika. So most people don't have Zika, but a lot more people had Zika before, than before last year. And that's a problem, right? So most people do not have a problem paying back their college loans. But some people, and an increasing number of people, have a problem paying back their college loans. The interesting thing about student debt is it's actually the people with small amounts of debt that are more likely to default than the people with large amounts of debt, and that's kind of counterintuitive. But I want to share, so when I heard this statistic, and I work in this, and I kind of generally knew this, when I saw that the average balance of a loan in good standing was higher than the average balance of a loan that was in default, so like people that are not paying their loans owe less than people who are paying on time, which didn't seem to make any sense because you think, oh, the loans are too high, that's why you can't pay. But it kind of leads back to the completion. It's people that took some college, didn't graduate, so you don't have as much debt, but you don't have that labor market benefit of the degree or the credential to pay it off. And so some people are borrowing a whole hell of a lot and more than they used to, and that's bad. A lot of those people are going to graduate school. I borrowed to go to graduate school. I just borrowed some more to go to graduate school. And I would say, if you're thinking about that, chill for like a second and work.
How many people are thinking about going to graduate school? Okay, a whole lot. How many people have already gone to graduate school? Oh my, it's like almost
Oh my
everybody is in
God.
one or the other
Oh
category.
my God, yeah, yeah. All
Okay.
right. We could talk more about that, but yeah, the debt at graduate school, that $1.2 trillion number that you hear, like almost half of that is graduate school debt. And so,
Only like 10% of the students.
which is, yeah, it's not
So-
that many students, so it's a lot of debt. Where people get, like when you see those six-figure debt, you can't, well, first of all, the federal government won't let you borrow six figures for undergraduate. So either you got that from a private bank, which is increasingly less likely after the financial collapse, that private banks would give people lots of money for undergraduate student loans. So a lot of that is graduate student debt.
So I would also say a lot of people talk about, should you take on debt to go to college? Should you go to college? And one of the things I'd first talk about is, often when people say that, they're not talking about themselves or their own children. They're talking about somebody else. And I tend to be maybe a bit of a conspiracy theorist on this one, okay? So just take this woman's bias, right? But it's like, why wouldn't you want to be educated? What about your life would mean it would be a good thing for you not to be educated? Well, there are reasons why people don't want other folks to be educated, and they're all nefarious, right? They're not about creating empowerment. They're not about moving ahead. They're really about keeping people in place. So one of the things I think we have to say is, why is there debt, and why is the debt increasing? And I think overwhelmingly it's about public disinvestment in higher education. As education becomes more and more necessary, as it becomes one of the few keys to make sure that you have a family-sustaining wage as you're an adult and start moving ahead, so there's more of us in that pool, if you will. The ways in which, in particular, the state government, not the federal government, but the state government has really systematically lowered its support per student of dollars going into higher education, that's why you're taking out loans, for the most part. And yet when you, whenever I go on, like, I haven't actually been on Fox News, but I've been on Bloomberg News, and when I'm on those kind of places, they're always saying, well, Gail, your students should just be plumbers. I'm like, you mean my students because they're poor or because they're students of color? Like, what are you talking about here? But there really is that sense of, oh, there shouldn't be an investment.
Too many people are going to college. Not one of my kids, but too many other
But
people
too
are going
many
to college.
other people, right? So I think it's really important for you all to ask those questions at a policy level, at a level that looks at where we spend our dollars and why we spend them in particular places. So that.
I want to take that issue and look not at the students who are attracted already to what LaGuardia offers, but about the people who, or a lot of people who don't go to college, especially from lower income communities, who actually would be, who have been drawn to for-profit colleges because the for-profit college makes it about employment. They say, we will train you quickly and efficiently to be this job or that job. Now, the problem has been that they've been lying about their ability to actually make that happen, but it does say something about the students, the potential students that they are reaching that our traditional systems are not reaching.
But I
so
think
is there something to,
I think it's an
is there
easy
something
answer.
to, there are a set of people that I know, I even went to high school with, who the idea of going to more school, like what they had, that's the tradition, having history classes and literature classes and everything else, does not appeal to them, but other kinds of things would. Do we need more of that, those kinds of options?
I don't think it's about appeal. I think it's the fact that, for the same associate's degree in computer science, for example, that you can get from me or from DeVry, who used to be right next door to me. They charged about $25,000 a year for that, and I'm charging $6,000. But of that $25,000, most of it which was federal dollars, I learned all this from Bob, they spent a third of that on advertising.
Recruiting that.
they were like, because they were a mill, and they really exploited the policy structures in order to use they used their money for basically 2/3 of their money went to two things that unfortunately are not true for me. One is 1/3 of it went to advertising. The other is just about 1/3 of it went to really high compensation for their senior leaders. So the guy who was running DeVry in the building next to me was making, I can't remember exactly, and this was like 6 years ago, but like $2.4 million a year. I'm not making that much. I made a really bad choice.
Right.
But so I don't think it's about appeal.
You made the right choice.
I don't think it's about appeal. I think it's about capitalism and a capitalist structure that allows advertising to really lure students. I mean, it was on TV during the day, right after Jerry Springer, right? So that's part of it. And the other part is I don't do a good enough job of saying these are the 12 careers that if you come to LaGuardia in 2 years, you're going to make a family sustaining wage. So it is partly me, but I don't think it's about individual motivation. Mm-hmm. I think it's about these other structural things.
And I would, we were both trained to be teachers, right? We both never taught for much time, but, and maybe it's just the nerd in me, but I really believe that if you make history or whatever touch a person, like if you do teaching well, it's engaging. When you do teaching badly, it's not fun. And so I would hope, I actually think, and this is me though, it's more fun to learn kind of frivolous subjects than it is to learn kind of the technical stuff. Like, it's kind of just boring to learn about like how to do something. It's useful, and the skill stuff will help you get a job. And this is the challenge that you actually have when you just learn a bunch of fun things and you don't learn any skills. Then maybe you can't get a job. So a lot of people get really poor teaching in high school and in elementary school and in middle school, and we don't do a good job of.
And in college.
And in college too. Yeah. And in college too. And the idea of having more of that is not appealing. And I think if we did a better job of engaging students in the classroom, that you would have more people that really enjoy that. And you can't do either or. You can't just teach a lot of fun things and have lots of great discussions that don't relate to anything that you might do in the future, but you can't just only do things that are really skill-based without giving people a broader sense of why they're doing what they're doing or their place in the world. I think that's incredibly, that kind of thing, the less skill-based, the less vocational, but the more kind of theoretical, are incredibly empowering to people, to help them understand kind of what is my place in the world, how have other people thought about the world, writings of, once you kind of discover political philosophy and you kind of see some of this stuff isn't new, and it kind of helps you make sense of life. And our founding fathers really believed that you couldn't have a democracy unless people were educated, and they weren't talking about education that was vocational in nature. They were really talking about the type of education that would help you kind of understand what you're here for.
Well, and I believe that discovery aspect of higher education, and most people go into college thinking they're going to major in one thing and they end up majoring in something different because of an experience they had, and often it's a good teacher that they had. I shared with you the story of the student who had completed her 3rd year at University of San Francisco. She was aiming to be a veterinarian. Her family felt very good about her financial prospects for the future, and she was going through all the classes that she needed to take, and she had to take an art class. She took the art class, and it totally changed her life, and she became an art major. And the only reason this was written up in the alumni magazine was that she then worked at Pixar and is doing very well. But my question is, let's say she was a low-income student who did not have a safety net of a family that would support her if majoring in art didn't turn out well. Like, what should our advice for someone like that be? It feels really risky for anyone without family support to make that decision to major in art instead of biology to then be a veterinarian.
We should subsidize art degrees more. I actually think we should do that. I think we should subsidize things that people are less likely to make a lot of money in, and then charge a lot of money for things that people don't. Like, if you're going to be an engineer, why are we subsidizing your stuff? It's high in demand. You can pay back the loans, whatever. If you're going to be an artist, you're less likely to do that, so we shouldn't. hostage nuts, but people don't do that. My grandmother.
They do some. I mean,
They
it's interesting,
sometimes, yeah.
And
There's
some people
places
argue the other way.
Yeah.
That, you know.
You should have less artists, so you should subsidize it less, and
Right.
just encourage people from ruining their lives.
These useless degrees, right? Yes.
So my grandmother was really, I may have told you this, really disappointed with me for going to graduate school in education. I got my master's degree in
Yeah,
education.
the data are not good on that.
No, they're not. They're not. So, and my grandmother worked in higher education. So I'm thinking, I'm following in your footsteps. I'm going in, and she said, you're a dummy. I was a black woman in South Carolina in the 50s who had a kid when she went to college, and the only thing I could do was be a teacher. And if I had other opportunities, I would have done them, but I raised all my kids. All my kids went to college, and here you are. You're my grandchild. You have this opportunity, and you major in education? Like, what are you doing? Go be a lawyer. She said, we don't have any lawyers. We've got people. Your aunts have, your PhD in education. We don't have any lawyers. Go be a lawyer, right? And so I don't have a good answer, but I do think we should have better data. Because one thing that I really feel, education is actually kind of interesting because people use it as an example a lot, like, oh, we won't have any teachers. But for teachers in public schools, they have a salary scale. I knew exactly how much money I would make. More than likely, we didn't have as many charter, $100,000 things that, when I was in school. But I knew that I would likely make less, but, good middle class, whatever, less than a lawyer. A lot of other things it's not clear what the job prospects are, like in terms of how much money you'll likely make, what you can actually get a job in, most people with these degrees end up doing. And I think we should give people good information about that stuff so that they can make an informed decision. So I wanted to go into teaching, and I knew full well what that was going to be. I had no idea I would end up doing this other stuff, but it was like, clear eyes, full heart, can't lose. Right. And I feel like for too many people, like you major in psychology and you have no clue what that means, other than once you're a senior, somebody's like, oh, you got to get a PhD. And you're like, wait a minute, what? So I think better data on it, but I don't know the answer to.
Well, I think it's more than better data. Better data would help, but I can't tell you how many students come into LaGuardia, and I'm like, wow, so, why are you here? What are you interested in? They're like, I'm interested in forensic psychology. I'm like, great. Do you know there are 2 of those in New York City? Like, do you understand there's no jobs there, but there are 4 TV programs about it, right? So everybody wants to do it. Right. So part of it is, particularly for low-income students, I have students who don't understand what a salary means. So when I say, oh, but that job will only make $25,000 a year, and this will make $36,000 a year, because the only people that in their family have made an hourly wage. So they don't even know how to think about salary, okay? So then more data is like, yeah, I think they need real experiences. And I think this is where internships are really important, and sometimes just engagement. So one of the things I would ask all of you as you go out and do, run Google or whatever you're gonna do, like do amazing things, remember to come back to the community colleges and just talk about what you do. So we brought students over to next to it. We're in these big old buildings in Long Island City. Right next to us is Manna Products, which is a huge cosmetics manufacturing company. Women, you haven't lived until you've seen a vat of melted lipstick before it goes in the tube, right? But we went over there, and our students just met with their C-suite. And a student came back to me and said, my life has changed. I'm like, oh, come on, it's not, you were there for an hour. She's like, no, really. I thought I wanted to do marketing. I didn't realize that was different from sales. I think I'd be great at sales. I love talking to people. You can really make commissions. I mean, when you're talking about low-income students who've never seen any of these careers, one of the things we have to do is infuse our college with real-life people who will say, this is what I do. I had another student who came back from one of these visits and said, I love internal auditing. I'm like, no, really? She's like, no, I love internal auditing. Like, right. And these are
what is internal? Well, maybe we shouldn't get
internal auditing is the auditor who is on the side of the
works
company.
For the company.
Who works
I see.
for the company
Okay.
and tries to make sure that your internal
that the outside
audits
one isn't gonna. Okay.
Yeah, and that you're also doing things the right way, so you're not losing money and nobody's walking out the door with all your unmelted lipsticks or whatever. It's sort of like you want to know those things. So there's so little broad
I think that's
perspective
true across the board, though. I mean, especially with low-income students, and I think exposure is, so it's not just the data, it's also exposure to different types of careers. But when you look at the fact that the two most popular majors are business and psychology, it's like those are like, well, one, business says, I want to go into business.
Right.
Like, I want to be a business person. And the data suggests that many people, colleges aren't doing a good job of also pairing that with real skills and anything. So you kind of have a broad general sense of business, but you actually don't have any account. Like you're not prepared to take a CPA exam. Like
right.
there's no, you don't actually have the math stuff that businesses want, or a refined enough sense of business to work in sales or marketing or anything like that, or internships in a real business to like give you a sense of, so the exposure, internships, but also I think data about what people make in specific programs and at particular colleges, because that could also help with kind of some of the for-profits where people aren't making as much as what they purport to.
But I'm going to go back to your experience in Minnesota. I know where she was in the wilds of Minnesota at her liberal arts college. Because the other piece, though, is that I don't want the liberal arts experience to be only for the wealthy kids who get to go away and have this lovely bucolic experience, right? So at LaGuardia, we have more students taking philosophy than almost any other college on the East Coast. Public, private, big, small. Because if students can't imagine a life for themselves, if they don't have a life of the mind, they're not going to make it in a knowledge economy. So we have to be really we have to understand what does vocational mean? To me, you're going to have a pretty sophisticated sense of how to put together information, how to make a connection, how to walk into this room like you're about ready to go and start drinking, which is, we'll be quiet soon. And you're going to meet each other, right? That's part of this. But you know how to go to somebody and say, hi, my name is, what do you do? Why are you here? Weren't those guys terrible? I mean, like, isn't it terrible we had to listen to them? I mean, but you know how to do that. Those are real skills that we need to provide, and the humanities allow that. So it can't be an either or. We really have to integrate these systems, I think.
So we've been pretty gung-ho on college is worth it, especially at the undergraduate level, and I want to challenge that a little bit. I was reading a study by Doug Weber from Temple University, who laid out the earnings trajectory of people with a college degree, people with some college, people with a high school diploma, and did some of the things that you probably learned in high school or college statistics classes that you're supposed to do when you analyze future events. So, if the possibility of earning something, if you have a 50% possibility of an amount of money coming to you, you multiply 50% by that amount of money. So he said, well, not, about at most 60% of people graduate from college. So you can't just say going to college is going to be worth the $1 million of extra money. You have to cut that in half right off the bat, because as much as you think you might graduate from college, the statistics say that there's a good chance that you will not. Then you also, that $1 million is actually over a lifetime. So you've got 40 years of earnings. You need to discount that by some time value of money. He put a 3%, which is totally reasonable, maybe even low. That brings down the number more. You also have to take into consideration the tuition you pay and the money you don't earn because you're in college rather than in the workforce. And when you do all of those things, the much repeated college earns you more, $1 million more over a lifetime ends up being somewhere, depending on how much tuition you paid, basically, somewhere between $80,000 to $220,000. I asked Doug, well, why didn't he take the next step and look at what if you invested the $30,000 of student loans in the stock market at its 8% usual amount, and
compare that to the
and compare that to the amount that of money that you get from the wage boost from a college education. And basically, if you do that, it's really the financial benefit that we all claim to college is pretty much gone. Now, no one is saying you should borrow $30,000 and invest that in the stock market. In fact, the
It's
argument.
probably hard to get that loan.
Yeah.
It would be hard to get that loan, but you're actually taking kind of a similar risk when you're borrowing money for college. You don't know what's going to happen with that investment. You know that on average it's a good investment, but you don't know what kind of an investment it is. And in some ways it's better, and in some ways it's worse. It's worse in the sense that it's like buying stock in one company, which everybody says you don't do. You spread it across all kinds of companies because that one
Go to
company,
every college.
Right, yeah, go to every
No,
college.
but you're investing in yourself.
You're investing
I
in
just
yourself.
want to be clear.
And
The
I think
company is you. That's
and
the
I
company
think that
is
gets
you.
to kind
Company is you.
of some of what you guys have said, which is like it needs to be about you, and whether it's right for you, and whether it's something that you're going to be driven to, whether you're going to a place that will be supportive so you can get through, and whether it's something you're interested in. And that art student, the article made it sound like she definitely would have been a veterinarian, but there was something that drew her to away from that toward the art degree. But are we? A part of what I want to ask is like, have we oversold the financial aspects of college in ways that cause people maybe to jump toward the wrong college or the wrong program for them because they think it's about the finances?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I guess part of it is in Doug's analysis, he presumed that things are going to, other than the compounded interest, basically, that things would stay the same. And I guess I just don't see the world going that way. I mean, I see the world going like this in terms of skills and no skills. So that's one piece.
That's true.
The other piece is that, you look at some of the work that Tony Carnevale did through the Georgetown Center for Education in the Workforce, maybe. Yep. And he would also say, you got to be very realistic about what you study. So that if you're going to study viniculture, but you're going to live in Iceland, maybe not the best degree that you want to get. So where you study, but also what you study is important, I think. And I do think it's hard to predict the future, but nothing that I've seen so far, well, I just read a dystopia, so either the world's going to fall apart and we all should just drink ourselves to death right now because there's nothing's going to happen.
Or in 20 minutes.
Or in 20 minutes, right, not right now. Or our ability to adapt to this global, connected, interactive world has got to keep going. And I guess to me, every problem is a nail and the hammer is education. And so I am sort of a one-note pony about that. But I've never seen anyone say that they regretted the education. They would regret the money. And it goes back to what you were saying about make sure it's a place that you really want to go to.
Yeah. And you have to have, you always have to have passion about, not always, but I have so many friends who have a, I hope she's not watching. I feel like I shouldn't use personal examples because then they're going to be like, why did you use my personal example?
Go ahead.
But yeah.
Tell us their address.
Good friend who really, really, really wanted to be a lawyer. Well, she didn't really want to be a lawyer. She wanted to make a lot of money. And I met her the first day of orientation, and she was like, hi, I'm so-and-so, and I want to make a lot of money, so I'm going to major in pre-law. I was like, great. I love teaching, so I'm going to, major in education. She's incredibly brilliant. So, of course, she aced all of her classes, got in a great law school, got a scholarship to go to law school, passed law school, got a job at a firm, and within 6 months she left and now is in a PhD program because she's always really been a nerd and academic and wanted to research.
Hated the law firm.
And hated the law firm life and culture. So I do think you have to be, have to meld both. Yeah. Be knowledgeable about what it is that you like and want to do, but also really clear eyes, full heart. And this is not an easy, I actually really think it's one of the most difficult decisions you will ever make in your life in terms of the amount of money, the time value of money, your opportunity cost, and we don't give people enough support and resources to make the decision. Right. You got a person looking at you.
5 minutes. Grad school. So I think it sounds like we've kind of given some. I'm starting to think that some of the advice for grad school is similar to the advice at the undergraduate level, which is
a lot less of go, at undergrad, I would say for the most part, you should go. Grad school, I would say, press pause.
And
Take
why do you give it a different, why do you have a different approach?
cost more, a lot more. And some of the research that we're seeing about master's degrees in particular is not promising in terms of how much it costs and potentially what the benefit is. And you can have the same kind of herd effect where a lot of master's programs are actually requiring that people work for a year or two to kind of figure out what it is that you really want to do, get to know the world before you jump right in. And I think that's really, really good advice. And I didn't work before I got my master's degree, but I was also planning to go right into teaching, and that's, again, very transparent that if you don't get your master's degree, you will not make as much money. So I already knew what I needed to know, which I want to teach, and I want to make more money than I did, so I got my master's degree. I ended up doing something else that I was really passionate about in policy. But for most people, I think it makes sense to kind of, if you, in general, kind of have a sense of the world before you do that.
Yeah, that's what I would say. I mean, I think part of it is you're also at a different level, even if you went, if you were 18 when you graduated from high school and then you went to college and you graduated in 4 years, and, so you're still pretty young in your life. Yeah. And I would say that unless you absolutely know, I want to be a lawyer, or I want to be a medical doctor, or, you're really clear, or you want to be an accountant and you want to get your, getting out there and tasting some of that. I mean, I've known, even at the community college level, people kill themselves to get into our nursing program. Because you graduate from a nursing program, you're going to make $70,000 in 2 years. That's like huge for low-income students. But they do it, and then they're like, ooh, I saw a dead person today. I'm like, you're going to do a lot of that. You're going to get used to that. It's sort of like what your job is going to be. And it's like, experience some of that. And so you're just at a point in your life where you can try that out if you can. And I think sometimes grad school is the default. It's like, I don't know what I want to do here. I graduated from college. Oh my God, I'll go to graduate school. Because it sounds very good, right? I'm in graduate school, right? When you have no idea what you're doing there. So just, I think, take some time.
And I think we make it way too easy for people to go to graduate school.
Right.
I'm trying to think about how much I should say about this, but yeah, we give people as much money as they want, and we make it way too easy for graduate schools to use that to subsidize. The big secret, if you don't already know, is that master's degrees are funding the rest of the college. You're funding the people that are doctoral candidates that are having their whole way paid. You're funding that as a master's degree student. They're the cash cow of a lot of colleges, and I think we should just, unless you're doing something where you want to be a veterinarian, or you want to be a doctor, or you want to, something that's very clear.
Or you want to be a teacher. There's a lot of good reasons.
Yeah. But if we eliminate the master's cash cow that's subsidizing undergraduate and doctoral education, then tuition has to go up for undergraduates because
how about we really get more public funding?
So let's go to that. So before we go to the audience, so thoughts about the presidential campaigns and discussions about, obviously this 8
That's
years
your last
ago,
question, Bob? Like, really?
8 years ago, there was no discussion of college in Obama's first campaign at all. Really just nothing. And now it's been one of the top issues. Any thoughts before we turn to the audience for questions?
It's challenging, and I think one of the things is that we've seen this fight in higher education for the full pay students. Okay, so it's like, in the highly selective colleges, about 73-74% of the folks going to the highly selective, the Ivies, the highly selective, are very high income people. It's like, and yet we're still funding all kinds of stuff for them. So I think we really have to. We have a big conversation in our country about race right now after this horrible week we've lived through. We have a big conversation about inequity. If we don't have a big conversation about how higher education either plays into that or doesn't, I think all we're doing is exacerbating those two big fault lines in our country.
I think I'm glad that people are talking about higher education and how to, I feel like this is similar to a lot of other issues that get talked about on the national stage, which is the most disadvantaged people and their experiences are not the mainstream that's not what the mainstream populist kind of movement is asking for, and it makes me sad because I think that a lot of us, so we need more public investment in higher education. We need more public investment in higher education, but we really need more low-income, first-generation, and minority college students to graduate from college. Like, that's what we need. We need to close the divide of higher education becoming, making things more inequitable, which looks like that's what's happening. You have kind of the haves of higher education and the have-nots, and it's actually exacerbating inequality rather than reducing it, and that is troubling. And free college, by and large, doesn't solve that, and I worry that because we think that's the populist idea, like that, it has become the most progressive thing in our minds, and it's not. So.
All right, with that, let me go to the audience with questions. Go here. And there's a microphone coming. There you go. Is there a switch, or does it?
Oh, there
it's good now.
Hello? Okay, thank you.
Tell us who you are.
Oh, my name is Luis Gonzalez. I work at Align. We're actually up the block on Broadway. Alliance for Greater New York. I actually grew up in poverty, like horrible, horrible poverty, and a person in color. So for myself and everyone else like me, higher education was our way out if you didn't die. So for us, once you got into higher education, the costs were just problematic. And what really made it hard was we had to work. We had jobs. So I think my question really would be, what can higher education do to increase research opportunities and increase work-study pay, which right now sits at minimum wage, as well as, make it so that colleges can kind of have this program where if they go to internships, which most interns are unpaid, kind of give them money to go get an internship instead of having to spend all their college years, working in a grocery store.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Biggest problem for most low-income students is that they have to work a lot, and they work a lot, and it takes away, as you're mentioning, from other opportunities. It takes away from study time. It takes away, I think, a lot of problems that academics say are with low-income students that are academic challenges are really financial challenges that are masking themselves as academic challenges. If you're working 40 hours a week, you don't have as much time to study. You don't have the mental energy to place on these things. And we should be making college free for low-income students and prioritizing that and subsidizing.
You're saying free, not just tuition.
Not just tuition. So it should be tuition fees, tuition paid, and you should get a subsidy for living while you're in college if you are a low-income person. That's what I think we should be doing more of.
And I think some of the proposals that are out there for free college, particularly I'm on the national organization that's looking at free community colleges, it's really a way to think about how to get more money into the system. Pell Grants, which are the primary way in which low-income folks get federal dollars, were designed, when you talk to Alice Rifkin, they were always designed to have some money left over to live on. Right? To have some money left over to live on. So I have students who are working, how many hours a week on average would you work when you were going to college?
I was working 36 hours.
And were you going to college full time?
Yes.
Think about that, right? Think about what he was doing. It's incredibly difficult. And so, yes, we want low-income students to go to STEM, right? What's the best way to get into a STEM field? To have an internship in a lab. How do you do that? You have to be paid, or the money that you were making in your 36 hours has to be reimbursed. Martha Cantor, who was the Obama administration undersecretary, said the one thing she wanted to do as undersecretary, she's just left, I think, a year ago, said she wanted to change the tradition in which a lot of the work-study money goes to very, very elite colleges. Mm-hmm. They don't do it based on the number of poor or low-income students. They do it based on history.
How long you've been in the program.
On history, right? It's just like, we got... So here's the Undersecretary of Education who really wanted to do this. She didn't do it. So there really are policy changes that we need to advocate for.
I got work-study money as a graduate student at Harvard. It was
Right.
like, why do I have work-study money?
Right. And the other
Because Harvard gets it.
Because Harvard has a lot of work-study money because they're the oldest college in the program.
I
We
wanna
also
make sure
talk
people-
about the wage rate, and I think that's also a place to really push colleges to raise the wage rate in order to have that be more supportive of you.
Another question. Right behind where he was, right here. You?
You.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Went over.
then we can go back.
Is it on?
Yep.
I guess so. Hello, everyone. Glad to see all y'all, and thanks for speaking for us. My name is Calvin Seville. I pretty much graduated from college already, and my question is, should future college students sacrifice career interests in order to obtain job security? Because for me, it's like you stated before, there's certain college students who may have an interest in, let's say, philosophy, music, art. However, there's markets such as technology, STEM, which is more profitable and they actually get a bigger return. So should someone give up what they love in order to pursue what will actually feed them?
Can you just put a dagger in my heart right now?
Her next, yeah.
So what do you say? I think this is a really
I think it's a very difficult,
really
and
hard
personal
question.
I
mean, part of my answer is I think a lot of people who choose something they're not really interested in end up being dropouts because it's hard to stick with that. I mean, the other alternative, maybe some of them end up loving it, and the stuff, the artist in them is what they do in their spare time. So it's not like your job has to be the one thing. But it's very personal. It's
one of the most difficult things that you'll
really
struggle with
hard.
in life, I think.
Yep.
And even if you end up majoring in something and start working in a career, you could be in a job. And I actually have come to, it's a very much of a luxury to have a job that you love. Most people in the world do not have jobs that they love. For the history of humanity, most people have had to just work. And so if you can marry them, that's great. But I also talk to friends of mine who have very good jobs that they enjoy enough to do them well, but do not feel passionate about. And they volunteer on the weekends, and they go to the opera, and they find ways to engage in the world. And so I wouldn't, I don't have an answer like one way or the other. I think it's a very personal decision, but I don't think it's wrong necessarily to do something because you have to pay the bills, especially if the alternative is not paying the bills.
Yeah, and I think that's the issue, is balancing the money issue.
Yeah.
I think just for life advice, I'd say try to make it something that you love, and if you can afford to do that.
If you can afford to do
if
that,
you can
that's
afford
great.
to do
And
that,
be great.
and that might be, and part of that is if you're the kind of person where, like the fact that you're not going to be able to buy the expensive car versus the old clunker doesn't bother you, then
Right.
then that's fine. And there's a chance then that because you're doing something you love, you end up excelling in ways where you actually are one of the people who majored in art or philosophy or whatever and made boatloads of money, because there are plenty of those out there. I mean, we're just talking averages, and there are a lot of people of all majors who make a lot of money, and some people who make a little. So I would generally lean in the direction of try to major in the thing that you'd like spending time doing, even if it wasn't assigned to you, if possible. I think that's great.
Don't go
I think
hungry.
That's a good sign. But
don't
don't
live
go
on the
hungry.
street.
Exactly.
You got to be real about this.
Yeah.
But it is, the reason I said there's a dagger in my heart is because I see students at LaGuardia who are incredible musicians, amazing artists, really want to do lots of different creative things. And just like in New York City, where there's probably as much opportunity to do creative work and get paid for it as any place, can't make a living at it. And they really come back and do much more practical things, and it feels unfair to me. It's real, but it feels unfair.
Simone, go ahead.
I had two questions. The first one was, are there inequalities in state funding? So for example, I went to an undergraduate state college in Florida, and I went to a private graduate school in New York. From when I left Florida, I had $7,000 in loans, but I also had the Florida lottery subsidizing my tuition and Pell Grants, as you mentioned, to help pay for my monthly rent. And so I was just curious, because I'm noticing people in New York City have much greater challenges affording college.
Yes, there are huge inequalities in state funding. Florida's probably one of the more affordable states in terms of tuition prices. I think New Hampshire is the worst. In terms of they have very little support, and the public tuition is like over $20,000, I think, for in-state.
Very different.
My second question is, so I actually majored in psychology, so I am one of those people that doesn't always have a definition, but I'm also at times now mentoring people of going into social work school or doing other social service professions. And I see them questioning whether they should apply to Ivy League schools that are available on the East Coast, and this hesitation because of the background that they've come from. What would you speak to that as far as, being able to advise a younger generation who is considering these types of fields?
They have a hesitation because they went to.
Because it costs so much to go
Oh.
to. Because of the background. They're more low income.
I see.
They may apply, but they'd even be hesitant to attend if they were accepted.
Everybody, I think, what is it called when you have the anxiety, like, inferior, it's not an inferior, what is it?
Your intuition?
Right.
Imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome.
Yes, so think, that you shouldn't be there, right, like everybody else, and this is, but it's common, and the crazy thing is you don't realize how common it is, and that a lot of other people are feeling the same way, and so I tend to think that colleges should do a better job of being, but at the same time, I kind of also say, kick down doors and be in places where it doesn't seem like you should be. Dance halls, and when I was there, it's still there. It's not gone. And when I was there, they tried to rename it, but got sued by the Daughters of the Confederacy because they. I wish it was like it's like when you're in Tennessee and they're like, "This is absolutely normal. How dare you try to change the?" But when I first got there, I was like, "Wow, this is like, this is different." Just as capable of doing this work. I'm just as so.
Well, you mentioned funding in especially incoming low-income students are going to come in maybe feeling, they will notice very quickly that other, if it's the kind of college where there's a lot of higher income students, they'll notice that they came from different kind of background, and they'll start to worry about it. And a good college will really put effort into helping them to understand that there are a lot of other people feeling that way, and actually that even some of the higher income students are feeling, lacking in confidence and wondering whether they should be there, and helping to support students, which gets to funding. And there are differences in funding between states, but there's also differences. We mentioned a lot of low-income students to go to community colleges, and we spend a lot less at our community colleges supporting those students than we spend at our public four-year colleges, and even less than at private colleges and universities. And so while we can kind of say, well, the students have less academic background that are going to community colleges, so a low graduation rate can be expected, but we're also spending less giving them the kind of support that students get elsewhere, because there's just, there are not as many, whether it's financial aid staff, social service staff, et cetera, that are reaching out and available to students because of the financing. Another question. Let's go all the way back there.
Hi. My name's Casey Lamb. I work at a nonprofit called Schools That Can. And I think you guys have sort of touched on this throughout, that there are so many people who aren't making it through college and they're still leaving with massive amounts of debt. So how do we incentivize or mandate even that schools track their dropout records and lower them?
Well, one of the things I'll just say is they are not leaving with massive amounts of debt, okay? So if you borrowed money for a Subaru, not a high-end car, right, you'd probably have the national average debt. So I think it's really important to be realistic about what the debt is and where students are dropping out of. Right, again, but the debt is relatively low, and it's not like you got nothing out of that. You still are. I have people who said, I only came to LaGuardia because I really wanted to go in the Air Force, and so I got my 3 courses that I need. So again, I'm just saying it's a complex system. I think part of it is that we have not set up federal financial aid to do anything other than put money in the hands of students for the most part, to pay for tuition. So if they're, most low-income students go to community colleges, and most community colleges are very poorly funded. So then if you say, oh, now I want you to track students, you know, it's sort of like, how are we going to pay for those kinds of things? So I think seeing this as an integrated system is a really important part of how to do it. And think about public policy as something that has to integrate sort of inputs and outcomes.
I would say one of the reasons that we created income-based repayment on federal loans was that to the extent that people borrowed using federal loans, they wouldn't have to pay if they're basically, you know, minimum wage after college or after dropping out of college. They're not going to have to make payments on their loans. We need to do a better job of making sure that people are in that program, yes. But it is kind of an insurance, because I think the other side of we don't want people to not take the opportunity of trying college because of the possibility that they might have loans that they can't repay. So having some kind of insurance so that people can take a shot at it, because I think as Zakiya was saying earlier, you may well take a class you never expected that you would be interested in the subject, and you take it and you love it, and you know, end up, so that's why it is important to give it a shot.
There's a lot of efforts to try to change the federal, to make some incentives. It's very, very difficult. Knowing what the right outcome measures are is really hard. Trying to account for the different types of students that are served at different types of colleges. I mean, you work in K-12, so we've got this whole accountability scheme in K-12, and in some ways, I think the toxicity of where that conversation is now has infiltrated any conversation that you might have in higher ed about that. Because of some of the same considerations. But I will say, just so you know, that there's lots of conversation about about doing that. It's just what measures do you use? How do you make it fair so that you're not penalizing people for serving low-income students? But again, you're familiar with some of the same kind of challenges.
So where's our mic now? You want to pick somebody?
Hi, Cristian Gonzalez Rivera from the Center for an Urban Future. So quick question. I mean, it's like I read an article recently about Australia's system. I mean, it's like where the repayment is fully integrated with wages, and so and it's completely income based. Right. So, what are some of the barriers to having something like that here? I mean, you can get as nitty-gritty as you want with that. Actually, I'm quite curious.
So, let's see, politics, and politics.
Actually, I would say not. So, okay. Australia started from having no system at all.
From being free.
They basically had free, and they had support, and they were moving to having some charges, and they were trying to figure out how to financing it. So Australia, in a lot of ways, had an easier time just instituting a system from zero. We had a system of student loans and really diverse array of types of colleges and charges, and so a just small percentage of your income approach would probably work for public and some of the lower cost public and community colleges in the United States. But there's this huge question about probably all of the flagship research universities, both public and private, about how do you make that kind of a system work. So those of us who worked on income-based repayment kind of took the Australia concept.
Bob basically created
and said,
this. Right.
Okay,
nice.
Let's do something like that. And I think we might actually move more and more because of the problems of the current income-based repayment system, people having to share their income information. Like, it's now really logical to just allow people to do have it taken out of their paycheck, even just voluntarily. And I think we may get there, where we have something that's kind of like Australia, but with the big asterisk that Australia is basically a state-run system. Yes, so all of the questions about does Penn get, how much more does Penn get than Berkeley or whatever else, though they don't have to deal with those. That's all dealt with. That's the politics.
They have like 40 colleges in Australia. And so the size and scale is
right. So there's some complexities, but I think we'll get some of the simpler approaches to paying by your income and not freaking out about a college bill Actually, so Jeb Bush's higher ed proposal was actually kind of a Australia-like proposal, and not a bad proposal at all in terms of way of
And if
thinking
only we
about
could
that.
get there on filling out your financial aid form.
Right.
I would be even happier with that.
Right. So I think we have time for one or two more questions.
Hello, hi, I'm Ashley. I'm the director of college and career counseling at a small unscreened public school in downtown Brooklyn. And many of our students, about 80% of our students are first generation college students, many of which also have a zero EFC. So a big push for our office is to get students into HEOP.
Zero EFC means very low income. Just
Very
a quick
low
note.
income, yes. So, and many of our students qualify for higher educational opportunity programs, which is a New York State program which offers full financial assistance, but also academic and personal support, which a lot of our students need, and a summer immersion program, so to help with that transition to college. And this is, CUNYs have it, we have a lot of students going to CUNYs, getting those refund checks, but something that I feel that our students in these HEOP programs, especially students who go away, tend to graduate on time than students locally in the CUNY system, and also students who aren't in this opportunity program because they don't have that personal and academic support, while they do have that complete financial support. And so my question is, in addition to financial supports, what policies are in place or should be in place to hold colleges accountable for supporting first-generation college students? So academically, making sure that they get out of remedial classes and aren't stuck in remedial classes, and personally as well.
Well, so the accountability language that you use is so interesting to me. So, I deal with the poor. I deal with your students wholly. That's the only people who go to LaGuardia. I get about 1/3 the money that City College does, and I get about 1/12 less than that of what NYU does. So should I be held accountable in the same way that NYU is? So it's sort of like part of it is how do we give more? I mean, what I would love, that question, I'm going to reframe your question, okay? The question I want to answer is, how can we work together so that I can get more public money to actually hire the advisors that they need? I have about one advisor per 600 students at LaGuardia. It's sort of like that's, and I feel, and we have a lot. I have a 300-kid daycare center at LaGuardia. I mean, there's a lot of needs in serving poor students. So when we talk about accountability, I really want to say what we have to do, in K-12, there's a floor economically. You cannot spend less than this amount per student. There is nothing like that in higher education. There is nothing like that in higher education. And that's why higher education is becoming increasingly part of the problem. So the accountability language is like somehow I'm like screwing with these students, and I'm not screwing with these students. I really want them to have it, but I have the same amount of state money that I got per student that I had in 2008, okay? So how are we going to really fix the system of funding public higher education to provide the services that low-income students need? So part of it is, I think, taking a mentality that doesn't deal with the actual funding issues that you're looking at when you're looking at where low-income students go to college. I like to use my daughter as a foil. She's a professor at Williams College, okay? Williams College, I think about $73,000 a year to go to college. And if a student gets in trouble, they have like deans. They would the three of us would all be surrounded by us, to a student, right? It's sort of like, so that makes, I want to hold Williams accountable. How to hold me accountable? Help me. Help me get the resources that I need, because boy, do I want these students to graduate. And I'll tell you, you come and talk to the faculty, they want these students to graduate. But when we, so I have students who are, and you know this, I have students who are homeless. I have students who have just aged out of the foster care system. I have students who come in with a high school diploma, and this, I'm sure this is not true of your school, but many schools in New York City, they're reading on a 6th or 7th grade level. So again, I want to help those students, but But to talk about accountability, I think we really have to broaden to a system level accountability. Because if you don't do that, you'll just close all the community colleges in the country, who are the only people who are trying to serve really low-income students as a majority of their students.
Meanwhile, we're giving Harvard millions of dollars a year to give out in work-study money to very wealthy students. And the inequities there, there's nothing like Title I in higher education, right? So the money follows the student, it's completely voucherized. So it's very different, and I think that's probably the biggest challenge, is how to equalize some of that at the state and federal level.